exciting to cut the ribbon on Station 9, serving the Rosemont neighborhood. And along with being the home of some of the very best firefighters Orlando has to offer and having some of the best equipment, Station 9 was also built with firefighters' health and safety first and foremost. So the station was designed to promote diversity and inclusion in the workplace and includes private individual crew bunk rooms, showers and restrooms, and a secure room for special uses such as nursing.
Trailing Thoughts from Shingle Creek Trail. I've never seen more animals on a bike ride. Is that another water bird? They're like mini seaplanes. Imagine having the power of flight, only to spend so much of your day underwater. That's got to be really confusing and terrifying to the fish.
I remember very well, like 20 months, almost 2 years ago, Justin, our general manager, was meeting with PKZ and the fantastic program of Black Bee Honey. We had a tasting in the room over there. We loved their product, we loved the story, and we decided that right away we want to be partner with them. We want to be working with them and take their product to the next level and make it known to the public.
I've been waiting for this for weeks. I gotta tell you, I am so ready to do this. I even have the bed ready. What? So when you get home, we can get really dirty.
Gotta go.
Hey! Here you go. With all this compost, we're gonna have the best plants in the neighborhood.
Good morning and welcome to the April 4th, 2022 workshop of the Orlando City Council. Commissioners, today we're going to look at our community response team. For over the last 2 years, the city's taken many actions to create a more equitable and inclusive community for all residents. And one of those ways is looking at the interactions with the OPD and other first responders. So last March, we launched a community response team pilot program to have a more compassionate and effective response for those experiencing behavioral health crises. So we partnered with Aspire Health Partners, and community response team members respond to some of the 911 calls that are for OPD. They're focused on de-escalation and connecting those in need to treatment and support. So OPD Captain Lavetta Quinn Henry heads that up. She's going to share those results, but first I'd like to call on Chief Roland to give us an overview of the CRT program.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. You know, traditionally, law enforcement.
Turn his mic up.
Yep.
Try it
Law
again.
enforcement. All right. Ready? All right. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners. So we know traditionally law enforcement officers are often tasked with responding to calls about people in mental crisis, homelessness, and substance abuse. There is increasing support for the creation of non-police response programs like our community response team. And Captain Quinn Henry will provide a detailed overview of the pilot program for 2021. I will briefly provide additional context to what we are doing to address citizens experiencing mental crisis in the city of Orlando. Last year, we received approximately 912,000 calls through our 911 communications center, compared to 812,000 calls in 2020. This was a yearly increase of more than 99,000 calls. Of these calls, 285,000 were citizen officer-initiated calls classified as an incident requiring further law enforcement action. 13,558 individuals were taken into custody. 10,892 were adults, which is approximately 80%. 2,111 were Baker Acts, approximately 15%, and 555 juveniles, approximately 4%, were taken into custody. Of the 13,558 incidents where someone was taken into custody, less than 3% involved a response to resistance. We increased crisis intervention training, CIT, for officers and dispatchers. CIT training is a 40-hour course of intensive training on recognizing and addressing individuals in the community who have a mental illness or other behavioral health crisis. We have made it a priority to have all newly hired officers receive CIT training during their recruit orientation or prior to them completing the field training program and going on solo patrol. Out of all the members of the Orlando Police Department, 385 sworn and 79 civilian staff are needing the training, and we believe that 6 more classes scheduled for this year through 2023 will complete everyone at the Orlando Police Department receiving this important training. There are 120 officers scheduled or members of the agency scheduled to attend the CIT training through June 13, 2022. Today, more than ever, it is very important to have alternative programs like the Community Response Team and for our officers to be properly be trained in crisis intervention training. I just want to reassure you that we are committed to supporting both. Lavetta.
Thank you, Chief.
Welcome, Captain.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, Commissioners. First of all, I want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity to lead the team, but more importantly, to have this really important program to be a part of an alternative response for policing. So as we look back for the community response team overview, we'll look at the stats. So last year, you all graciously approved us to have a budget for the team of about $450,000. We partnered with Aspire Health Partners, and we began answering those calls for service on March 1st, 2021. Initially, the team began going out to those non-violent mentally ill calls and attempted suicides. What we realized is that the team actually could take a little bit more responsibility on those mentally ill well-being checks and attempted contacts, because at the very basis of it, a lot of those types of calls are checking on those loved ones who underlyingly have some mental health challenges. In November, they also partnered with the Orlando Fire Department because they have those frequently contact individuals that are dealing with some mental and behavioral health issues. So CRT's responsibility. They respond to individuals in mental health crisis influenced by substance abuse as well. They follow up with referrals from OPD as well as OFD. They do crisis intervention and brief counseling. They evaluate the needs for individuals who call upon police to help them in their crisis. And then they facilitate access to community-based or inpatient services. So a look back. If we look at what our team has done, and they've done an amazing job, this is a 12-month look back. The initial arrive to on scene, their dispatch, was 18 minutes. We were contracted for 60 minutes. They spent about 46 minutes on average with those individuals. In 12 months, they took 956 incidents, and they touched the lives of 918 individuals. 197 of those were Baker Acts. 133, we realized, are homeless individuals, and we started capturing that because we wanted to see how much more could we actually get these folks into services. And for those who are homeless, we know that sometimes that's getting them into shelter, and maybe they'll stay within their program and their treatment. So we started capturing that in July. And then Aspire treatment referrals, 361. 218 of them kept their appointments. 230 were giving referrals to community-based programs, and 133 of them kept their appointments to that. What's significant about this, Mayor and Commissioner, is that over 50% of those individuals actually went to the appointment. And in all of the conversations that I've had with individuals in our community, that is huge. That's a big push. And so as we look at calls by gender, we know that most of those individuals were males, followed by the fact that most of them were African American males. Some of them we know have experienced gaining access to treatment. And so when we started looking at exactly what we hope the team would do, it's exactly this. Those black males followed by white males who need access to mental and behavioral health, and that's what the data shows us. We know that of that, most of them are 18 to 30 years old, followed by the age group of 30 to 40. This is the breakdown based on the districts. Commissioner Gray, 112 individuals received services in the last 12 months. Commissioner Ortiz, 92. Commissioner Stewart, 155. Commissioner Sheehan, 149. Commissioner Hill, 333. Now, what's interesting about that is we know that our CRT is housed there in her district, and some of those are admin calls, training, things like that, that OPD actually captures in our CAD system. But yet, still, the vast majority of the individuals that's receiving services is from her district. Commissioner Burns, 129 individuals, and 10 of those were unincorporated in those areas that touch the city limits very closely. 980 incidents were served by CRT. Now the benefits. We utilize a civilian team that deliver measurable outcomes for those low-risk incidents. We allow those distressed individuals to feel less threatened when they need those referrals to services. We facilitate access to mental health and community-based programs. There's mental health, access to housing, and addiction treatment. We reduce the referrals to the criminal justice system. We know that it costs about $120 per day to house an individual who has mental illness. We increase access to community and human-based services. We enhance law enforcement efficiency by using the team. We allow the officers to focus on what they're good at, and that's combating crime, and allow those mental health professionals to actually do the job. The potential cost savings to the community, law enforcement, and healthcare services is huge. Because again, it cost us approximately $120 a day to house an individual in jail. And also, when those folks are seen at an ER, it's about $3,000. So if we can mitigate that, we've saved. And then it provides an opportunity to de-escalate crisis situations. And I'm happy to report there were no use of force or arrest during the pilot program involving CRT. Some of our lessons learned. We had an independent group, Datalytics, conduct an independent study to evaluate the first 6 months of the CRT program. 95% of OPD all mental health related incidents did not result in arrest or hospitalization, which means that the team is most appropriate for those types of calls. Most of the nonviolent, mentally ill, or attempted suicide calls is fitting for CRT. Increased utilization of the current CRT, as well as adding more teams, would save us potentially 300 or more hours of officer time per month. Additional mental health professionals assigned to OPD communications will also increase the efficiency of CRT, meaning that having that person who has a background there to help triage the calls would offer exactly that, the opportunity for us to utilize our team more, as well as making sure that we are sending those individuals out to those types of calls that are specific to what we've asked the team to do. Crisis intervention training, as the chief talked about, will actually work to complement the efforts of CRT when they're either busy on a call or perhaps not on duty because we don't have a 24/7 team yet. But getting those additional officers trained will certainly complement so that they can make the referrals for the team and they can come in and follow up with that. Again, there was no arrest or uses of force involving CRT, and I'm very, very pleased about that. And then during the pilot program, CRT asked for officer assistance twice, simply because those individuals were self-harming for themselves and not for our CRT team. They've had the ability to really talk them down. And the community response team, like anything else, has experienced its own challenges. With staffing, we've had some turnover, but we're very confident with what the changes that we've made in asking for those people who have the master's level could still get what we're looking for to have accomplished and still keep us with a very robust team. So the future of CRT. I'm asking for us to continue this valuable program with longer-term contracts to fund it and provide those mental and behavioral health services for our city residents. I'd love to expand the team, again, adding that individual in the comm center to best sift out the calls that's appropriate for our CRT. Increase CRT's utilization for those calls that are appropriate. As we said, 95% of those calls the team could probably look to respond to that don't lead in arrest or hospitalization. And then to continue to educate our community about the benefits of CRT, knowing that they're there and that they are an alternative to police response. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Captain. I think both either subjectively or objectively, this pilot has been highly successful. Can you remind us of the staffing levels and the times that the teams are in the field?
Yes, sir. So the team it's 2 teams of 2 with a clinician and a caseworker. There's MH1 and MH2. And initially they were staffed to go up until 1 o'clock in the morning from 10 to 1 with staggered teams. Right now, Mayor, with our staffing challenges, we're working our 40 hours and they're still chiming, moving along. So as we get back up and running, we'll be back at our regular staffing time from 10 in the morning until 6, which is our peak times. But again, those 2 teams of 2.
And based on the service levels or potential service levels, if we were going to go ahead and not just continue it, but grow it, what would be your recommendation related to that?
So my recommendation is that we look at potentially adding 2 additional teams as well as the individuals to work the comm center, That way, sometimes I do believe our communications folks are a little bit leery about the types of calls that's appropriate. Having those mental health individuals in the comm center would actually help our teams be better utilized.
So that would be 4 positions in the field and then 1 position in the comm center.
That's what I would like, Mayor, but I'll take the beginning. The persons in the comm center is the most essential and crucial right now.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sheehan, then Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Captain Quinn Henry. I know this is something very, very near and dear to your heart. And a lot of my community folks are reluctant to call on mental health issues because, you know, there's a concern that there's going to be violence or something like that. So I'm certainly in support of the program. I think once we get this out of pilot mode, we need to let people know a little bit more about the program so that they feel comfortable calling. And you know, like they'll send me an email and say this person was at a shopping center, and I'm like, well, you know, why didn't you call? And they're like, I don't want to get the person in trouble. So I think that as we move forward, if we can do more of an educational piece on this as well, it'll be more, you know, community assistance that we can tell people, you're not, you know, hurting someone or having the police come to harm them. We want to actually get them, you know, into service, and that's what your statistics show. So I really appreciate the way that you have done this. And then I just wanted to clarify that out of the officer, you only need, one of our concerns was that officer assistance would be necessary and that we'd be putting the counselors in harm's way. And so what you're seeing is the officer assistance was only necessary 2 times out of 980 situations, and that was for self-harming and not for concern about, you know, harming the folks around them. So that's actually pretty amazing that our concern was that there was going to be, you know, harm to the counselors. And the only incidents that happened was self-harming.
Yes.
Out of 980 incidents, that's pretty remarkable.
Right.
Right.
And what's important, Commissioner, is because we know that those individuals are highly trained. They know exactly how to de-escalate those situations, and so I think we see that with the data.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Captain Quinn Henry, for your work with this pilot. Just a couple of questions. Do we have any data on repeat encounters with individuals who may have, you know, encountered the CRT team more than one time?
So we do not on the surface as it relates to those referrals and things like that, because sometimes what I do know is that perhaps officers have gone out a couple of times because, again, CRT was not available, and just passing, we haven't collected the data, but passing by with the officers, and they have come to realize the importance of the team. So if they've gone out a couple of times, that's usually when they make the referral, because they realize that, hey, maybe this is above my knowledge. But as far as the CRT repeated contacts, I don't have that information.
Yeah, because I think that may be a good data point for us to capture, to see how many of our community members are having multiple encounters with the CRT, because then that can point to maybe the effectiveness of them. You know, maybe these are the individuals that didn't keep the referrals, or if they did, what was the outcomes, you know, of those referrals.
And what we know is,
and Captain, one thing, there's 956 total calls and 918 different individuals that have been served. So I would suggest about 50 individuals that were contacted twice if you had 918.
so what ends up happening, Mayor and Commissioner, and you're right, what has happened with us is sometimes either citizens have called it in, to Commissioner Sheehan's point, they may have called it in and we've gone out and perhaps they're not there anymore, they're gone, or they deny services altogether and just say they simply don't have the need for it, or I'm already in treatment, and at that moment, for whatever reason, they felt they needed the police and no longer wanted our services.
Now, also, the appointments, seems like there were 218 appointments kept at Aspire. Do we receive any data on the outcomes or the status of those individuals and what has happened with those appointments?
So we do not. A lot of that plays into HIPAA, Commissioner, and so I generally kind of stay out of that part, because Aspire obviously can't tell us, you know, too much about the individuals.
And then my last question, for the calls that were handled by OPD that could have been more appropriately handled by the CRT team, do we have any outcomes on those as far as Baker Acts or anything that was, initiated by OPD versus the CRT team?
So I'll tell you that most of them were not Baker Acts, Commissioner, because as the chief talked about, 2,000, 2,100 or so were actual Baker Acts, and that's a mixture of children as well as adults. So I can tell you out of, all the calls for service that the officers have dealt with, and I think when I looked at the data, probably for 19, it was over 20,000 calls. And so 2,000 of those were Baker Acts from the officer side of it.
Well, again, I support this program, and as Commissioner Sheehan, and as one of your points, I think more education to the citizens on the benefits and how to utilize this program is needed. So thank you, and thank you to the Aspire team for their help as well.
Thank you all. And if I may submit to you all, if you would help me spread the word, I certainly don't mind coming out and speaking to anyone that you think would be appropriate for us to spread the word of CRT.
Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Captain, and great job. I appreciate it. A couple of questions that come to mind just in terms of process. The implication from some of the records is that you only had 2 police officers show up in 956 calls. That's probably not the case. I'm thinking what you probably have is a larger number. As an example, in Baker Act, only the police officer effectively can do the Baker acting at the time.
Effectively, the police officer actually does the transport. The Baker Act would have been done by CRT. Yes, sir.
So the idea is how many times are officers actually showing up? I know twice they showed up because of a potential harm to somebody. So it's a lot safer than we expected, I think. Mm-hmm. But how many times is officers actually showing up? About half the time?
So for the involuntary Baker Acts is when the officers must show up. Okay. And sometimes for voluntary, because it's just us giving them a ride to the central receiving facility or to Aspire. So you could reasonably believe that all of those Baker Acts, the 100 and something Baker Acts, would have been a transport by the officer, because that's what the law actually says needs to happen.
Right. And that's about 160, 170, 180 in that range. Mm-hmm. And then the other question is how many times is an officer showing up and saying, they're here now, I can go on? That's, part of the challenge of a call is who's responding, and I imagine that what you have is both teams responding, and when the officer sees that the Aspire team's there, he can go off the call and go on to something else.
So, Commissioner, I will tell you that the officers received training on CRT and its purpose, and so the vast majority of them already understand that when they're going out, they're to handle it. If they've been dispatched in the initial call, okay, they handle the call the way that we've always done it. And then if there's some questions, they are welcome to make referrals and things of that nature. But generally, it's not the co-responder model. It's generally going to be one or the other. Yeah. And there's been some good times where I will tell you that, we've had an incident where CRT came after the fact when the scene was made clear for an individual who was in crisis. It was a domestic situation. Our hostage negotiators were on scene. Well, police was there, but they realized it was an appropriate call for our CRT. After they got him out and knew that the scene was safe, CRT did exactly what they're trained to do, talked him down, family was happy, nobody was hurt, there were no arrests, and he went in and he was Baker acted and seen by Aspire.
Well, and don't get me wrong, my questions aren't designed to criticize. My questions are designed to get a better feel for it. Because the ultimate question we ask are 2 things. Are we providing a better service to our constituents? And are we saving money by not having to have a police officer show up every time it happens? So the ultimate question on this is, how much money are we saving? And if we are actually saving money and providing better service, then the idea of expanding this program is just so logical that we can't afford not to expand it. That's what I'm trying to get to, is that if you have these many calls, and typically an officer would have shown up, they would have done this, they would have done this, they would have done this, and then the next thing, now you have a CRT team that shows up, and they show up sometimes in place of the officer, sometimes alongside the officer, and so you end up having better service and you save literally manpower, or staffing power.
And so, Commissioner, I think you pretty much answered your question. You are absolutely correct. We're saving staffing, we're saving manpower, but more importantly, we're saving lives.
Yeah.
You know, when we can go out and take our professionals in lieu of police officers who are limited in their training, we're saving 900 and something lives potentially, right? It's a situation to de-escalate those folks in crisis. And so, Commissioner, you said it best. Those are all opportunities. And, you know, it takes one when it goes badly, and now we're paying lawsuits and things of that nature. So I think just in and of itself, those 900 and something encounters that were either with the team or most of them without having law enforcement involved, those are the savings. It's one life and one human encounter where I feel like the benefits are there.
Have we measured what the potential of savings already is and then what it can be in the future?
As I said, it's about 300 hours where we have the potential each month.
Each month, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in a sense, we could take that and multiply that out and come up with what would be a savings.
Yes, sir.
And that's a savings, or that's the number of, I'm trying to understand what the 300 is.
The 300 hours is where officers are allowed to focus on the crime as opposed to going to mental and behavioral. Yes.
It is a specific savings to do police work.
Yes, sir.
I am thrilled about this and to see stories all over the country about guys doing this and thinking to myself, why aren't they here talking to us? Because we're doing it and doing it well.
Yes, we are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, let me start by saying, great job. Thank you, Chief. The initiative, the proactiveness, and the implementation, OPD is by far the depiction, locally, the depiction of the Marines at the national level. Okay, the sheriff is the Army, and I didn't even mention the Air Force or any of the other ones today. Anyhow, just kidding. To piggyback on Commissioner Stewart's comments and question, at the impact, what would be considered the impact in terms of the crime incidents if we compare to prior years? The implementation, especially now that we have the pandemic and the inflation and all these other issues going on, how have you seen a real impact in terms of the incidents of crime in our city?
That would be hard to gauge, Commissioner Ortiz. Right now, we don't have that data to be able to compare one with the other. So it's a great question, though, for us to not only focus on that moving forward for stats, but also some of the questions that were asked that will allow for the team to create additional dashboards to track those situations so that we can clearly show this is what it translates into. But right now, there's no way that we can pinpoint exactly how that has helped when it comes to the overall crime picture. We can acknowledge the fact that by removing that 300 or so hours from our officers having to respond to those type of calls, then we can assume that they were able to then utilize that time to proactively patrol some of our areas, reducing the potential for certain crimes to occur, more than likely, just by having their presence there. So, and if I may, real quick, there's a lot of people also, Captain Quinn Henry has been our champion, the tip of the spear, but everyone that you see here, Dave Arnott, Aspire, Jody, you know, everyone who's here, Kevin back there guiding the ship with, you know, some of the reports that have been generated, they really deserve all the credit. Kathy, of course, all the credit for what we have done. So it's been truly a team effort.
Thank you so much. I'm so proud of what you guys have been doing, and of course the Orlando Police Department for many reasons, but something that comes to mind is how many lives have we could have saved had this program had been implemented many decades ago. Can you imagine? And coming to the realization of the impact that this is doing is amazing. So congratulations. We support that by all means, and I hope to see more statistics in terms of the criminal side of the equation here. So thank you so much. That was awesome. Thank you.
So, Captain, one last question. The county or the sheriff's office created a program that was co-responding versus what we're doing. Have you had an opportunity to compare notes with them to see how they feel like their program has been going? And
Yes, good question, Mayor. So we know that the county has a co-responder program, and it's a little different simply because they're going out to referral-based only. So they've done roughly over 3,000 referrals, we'll say. And then some of those have been more than like half of those are where they're actually following up with that. So their deputies are still the primary response for their program. And they're paired with their mental health provider and a deputy going out to those referrals after the crisis. And so that's where it's unique with us. We are going in the moment and we're changing lives in the moment and we're getting them into those community-based services. Honestly, when you look at how large the county is compared to big city Orlando, I honestly think that in comparison, we're doing a lot more. Even with our staffing challenges, we're doing a lot more.
okay, well, I think this has been a highly successful pilot. We have budget season coming up, so hopefully we can respond to your additional request.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, we're going to switch subject matter completely and switch over to some Greenworks programs. So one of the priorities for our city has been to switch our reliance to multimodal transportation options like biking and carpooling, mass transit, and also cutting down emissions. So one of the ways that we have continued to do that is to convene an electric mobility task force of transportation stakeholders, and they have developed an Orlando e-mobility roadmap, and Chris Castro is here to report on that. Chris?
Well, good morning, Mayor and Commissioners, and of course staff and guests. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you all our Orlando 2030 Electric Mobility Roadmap and some of the exciting movement that we have been starting to pick up as it relates to transitioning towards zero-emission vehicles. I'm also here with Ashley Van Stone, our Sustainability Project Manager in the Greenworks team, who has been leading the charge on this effort and many of our green building and clean energy works that you all hear much about. So just starting out, since the launch of Greenworks Orlando, we have been tracking our air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions that Orlando contributes to the global environment. And since that time, we have seen over 1 million tons of pollution being emitted from on-road vehicles. Many of the times, this pollution is being disproportionately impacted by our communities of color. And we're here to really think about how we center equity and inclusion as we start to make this pivot to clean transportation solutions. It's exciting to know that since we launched Greenworks, although our community has continued to grow at a rapid pace, we have seen a decoupling of that growth with our air pollution and carbon emissions. We've seen a reduction of over 19% across the entire city as it relates to our carbon emissions. And when you look at a per capita estimate, it's almost double that, about 37% per capita reduction. So we are seeing that although our community is growing in our economy, we have decoupled from carbon intensity, and that's a really good thing. In order for us to continue to move towards our goal of reducing 90% of our emissions by 2040 and achieving net zero emissions by 2050, we have been on this journey, the American Cities Climate Challenge, working across the country with over 20 different cities to work on identifying these high impact areas to reduce pollution and our emissions. And those high impact areas fall really within those 4 key buckets you see there. We have to continue to prioritize energy efficiency in our buildings and our homes and reduce building energy use. Secondly, we have to start to decarbonize the electric supply, and OUC is leading the charge and has committed to that net zero future and ramping up renewable energy at scale. Number 3 is reducing vehicle miles traveled and promoting our transportation alternative programs, our micro-mobility, our transit, our limo, our Sunrail, our Brightline. These are critical, and we can't solve this problem if every single person is in their own electric vehicle. But lastly, we need to really focus on electrifying everything that we can, moving forward with our vehicles and our buses, but also our buildings. So luckily, we are not the only ones really pushing this agenda, and the automakers have really begun to step up over the last couple of years and invest in moving this electric vehicle market forward. You've seen General Motors come out with news spending over $20 billion through the year 2025 on their electric vehicles. You have Ford matching with over $11 billion. You have Uber and Lyft that are committed to 100% zero-emission vehicles by 2030 across their portfolio. And what's interesting is the automakers over the last year have all come out with some pretty bold commitments towards electrification. Many of them saying that we are going to end internal combustion engines over the course of the next 10 to 15 years. And you can see there that almost every automaker you can list has major commitments to ramp up 10, 20, 30, 40 different models just over the course of the coming years ahead. And so we know that we have to start to get ready for that. Now, the state of Florida has also been seeing that this rise is something that we need to get ahead of. And the state of Florida has come out with 2 strategic plans to help guide this transition towards electric vehicles. The one on the bottom left there was developed by FDOT, looking at the EV infrastructure master plan. Where are the chargers that need to be placed, especially in some of those interstates and major corridors for evacuation routes? Of course, if we start seeing major hurricanes come our way, we need to make sure that those in EVs can get out of the state and seek safe haven. And on the right-hand side, you also see one that was developed by the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services and the Clean City Central Florida efforts, and it really helps identify the growth and policies and programs that we need to be enabling at the state. Now, e-mobility is good for a lot of different reasons. We know that it helps improve public health. We know that on-road vehicles contribute to 85% of carbon monoxide, 73% of NOx and SOx emissions. These are pollutants that directly impact public health and our respiratory illnesses. In addition, we know that it's good for the environment. We know that reducing carbon emissions helps mitigate the climate change impacts that we're going to face into the future, and that obviously, improving the environment is important for our health. But if you're not drawn to the importance around public health or the environment, financial benefits more often than not now are penciling out as it relates to electric vehicles. There's a new study that came out by the Zero Emission Transportation Alliance, or ZETA, just came out 2 weeks ago, talking about comparing gasoline vehicles and the total cost of ownership of a gas car versus an electric car. And the key takeaways are that essentially gasoline prices are inherently volatile. They're tied to these global foreign oil markets, and we're seeing that during this war over in Ukraine, that we're all being impacted around the world. This study also pointed to the fact that states like Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, North Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and our state of Florida, that driving and owning an EV is 5 to 6 times cheaper than driving a gasoline car. And you can see there on the graphic that if you fill up a Honda Civic, right now it's about $53, $54 to fill that up. But when you look at a Tesla Model 3 standard range, an equivalent sedan, it's about $6.59 to fill up. When you look at the F-150 regular versus the F-150 Lightning, you can see how staggering the difference is. And here in our city fleet, our division manager, Jonathan Ford, and prior David Dunn, have all witnessed that us moving towards electric vehicles helps to minimize the total cost of ownership for our city as well. And the other consumer report that I thought was interesting to share is that they looked at an analysis of the total cost, the total cost of owning a vehicle over the lifetime. And they're stating that between $6,000 and $10,000 can be saved by driving an EV versus a gas-powered car. So there are some real financial benefits. Now, we have been doing a lot to support electric mobilities. We've been transitioning our fleet thanks to the good work of David Dunn and Jonathan Ford. We now have over 200 plug-in vehicles in the city's fleet, including the entire city motor pool here at City Hall. We've been expanding charging stations in partnership with OUC. We are incentivizing drivers or residents to come out and test ride EVs. We're doing ride and drive events. We passed last fall the EV readiness code for new construction to start getting our new developments ready for this transition. But when we were looking at what's next, we started looking across the country in some of our peer cities, and we realized that they had also created an e-mobility roadmap, an electric vehicle strategic plan that really looked at goals and strategies and ways that we can continue to move down the road towards a cleaner transportation future. And so we looked at the city of Denver. We also looked at the city of Boston and the way that they moved forward with their strategic plans. And today we're presenting a resolution that's going to be on the consent agenda today to adopt the 2030 electric mobility roadmap for Orlando. In this roadmap, it essentially establishes 4 goals to pursue over the next decade. First being providing equitable and affordable access to electric mobility for all residents. Number 2, accelerating electric vehicle adoption in multiple sectors, not just your single occupancy vehicle, but across the board. Third is we need to ensure that we're building a robust and ubiquitous charging ecosystem. And lastly, advancing multimodal e-mobility options. As I alluded to earlier, it's not just about getting electric cars on the road. We need to move towards other transportation alternative programs. So when we were developing this approach, we thought about a number of different key components. One, we wanted to focus on coordination and the fact that we had a unified strategy and vision for our region here in Orlando. 2, we wanted to focus on collaboration, ensuring that everybody contributed to this collective vision, and you'll see shortly the various organizations that participated. Third, it's holistic. We need to really focus on diverse transportation options that are accessible and equitable for all Central Floridians. And lastly, it's actionable. These are, you know, us here in Greenworks. We're about not only developing plans and putting them on the shelf, but we're about moving this stuff forward. And so we wanted to make sure that these were very actionable as well. So here's just a quick snapshot of the trajectory. We launched this last January of 2021 and held 6 different convenings. These were about 3-hour workshop sessions with partners where we were looking at visioning setting, where we were looking at how do we center equity, how do we set the shared goals, indicators, and targets, how are we measuring progress towards this, developing the strategies together, ultimately creating the narrative that's within this roadmap, and then moving it forward through our Office of Communications, who helped us beautifully design this wonderful roadmap. Now this roadmap, as you can see here, had a lot of collaborations. The Office of Sustainability and Resilience, the Greenworks team, was steering this process. We were convening the stakeholders and, of course, working with the city to seek approvals. We also had our technical partners through the Climate Challenge, NRDC, Delivery Associates, and EV Hybrid Noir, as well as the Electrification Coalition, all which were providing technical assistance to our entire task force. And then we had this task force made up of city departments, community organizations, fellow governments, and as you can see here, over 18 different organizations at the state level, talking about FDOT and the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services and Drive Electric Florida. At the regional level, we had MetroPlan Orlando, we had East Central Florida Regional Planning Council. At the local level, of course, the city, the county, OUC, Duke Energy, CFX, the airport, and of course our academic institutions being really key to this effort as well. So very much a community-wide effort. Part of the effort was setting a vision for mobility, and we, throughout these workshops, we're posing different questions as to what in a utopian world, here's an example, what would mobility look like in Orlando in 2030? And we heard varying different things. One, we heard around needing to be multimodal. User experience needs to be seamless. We need to provide end-to-end solutions and moving away from vehicle ownership. We heard a lot around equity, that we can't leave anyone behind. We need to focus on access, the location of these chargers, transit program, and other car share efforts. And lastly, we heard about new technology and needing to be future ready for what's coming, autonomous, connected, of course, electric and shared mobility. We call them ACEs. That's the acronym of kind of the emerging transportation technologies and things that, you know, are coming up, right? We heard from CFX that they're building an electric highway that will charge vehicles as they're driving through induction charging. So we're at the forefront of piloting the next wave of technology. I'm not going to go through all of the strategies, but I did want to give you an idea of some of the things that we were looking at. So for goal number 1 around providing equitable and affordable access, one of the things I'll touch on here is 1.3, where a lot of the ideas were on how can we provide technical assistance to nonprofits, especially those working in disadvantaged and underserved communities, and helping them make a pivot over to electric vehicles. We're working with Lynx right now on a grant that can help some of these organizations to electrify their fleet. We also, from an equity standpoint, wove in throughout from goal 2 to goal 4, several equity strategies as well, because we wanted to center that in this work. At the bottom, 4.6, one of the strategies was around piloting an e-bike incentive program for low and moderate income residents. We know that not every resident has the ability of getting into a car, but these days electric bikes are becoming super popular, and they're a great, reliable way to get around town to jobs and other needs. On goal number 2, in terms of accelerating EV adoption, we wanted to focus on, how might we establish a bulk EV purchase program. In fact, we're right now in the process of developing a survey that we're going to send out to Central Florida fleet managers so that we can better understand what the demand looks like over the next couple of years. And there are cities that have developed bulk purchase programs where we can bundle that demand and try to lower the total cost of these vehicles at scale. Number 3, robust charging ecosystem. We're working with OUC on building out 8 different charging hubs. Right now, the first one being built here in downtown on Robinson Street. That should be completed here this summer. But there's another one going at the convention center currently. It is also being designed and built, and 6 other ones around the community so that we can provide these reliable multimodal charging hubs, not just for residents, but potentially buses, goods delivery, ride share, and many more. And 4th, on the advancing multimodal e-mobility options, we really want to focus on how can we develop an integrated app or platform that allows a seamless use of multiple modes of transportation. This wouldn't just help electric vehicles, it'll really help the alternative transportation program. So you can imagine having Lynx and Sunrail and Limo and our buses and our EV charging stations and micro-mobility all within an integrated platform, and even incorporating payment processing. This is something the Transportation Department has talked about for some time, and we feel that it's an important strategy to move forward. In closing, we wanted to let you know that this task force didn't just create this plan. We have an ongoing cadence of how we're going to move it forward. We have all committed to an annual meeting that we're going to come together and report on our progress. We have quarterly convenings. We just held our first quarterly convening last week with this task force to share kind of the early steps in moving some of these strategies forward. And then we actually have monthly working group sessions. There are 4 working groups, 1 for each goal. And these working groups are made up across the community with different stakeholders. And so every month we're getting together and we're moving this stuff forward. So you can see that this is really serious. So today's resolution that is before you really just recognizes Greenworks Orlando goals. It recognizes the importance of enabling clean mobility options for the health of our planet and the public. It recognizes the partnership with the Bloomberg Philanthropies Challenge, and then it starts to describe the composition of the task force, recognize the goals in the roadmap, and acknowledges that this is really in the best interest of public health, of safety, and the welfare of Orlando residents. So we hope that we can move this forward and establish a real roadmap for our region, and the goal is also for OUC and Orange County and Lynx and some of the other partners to bring this mutual resolution to their boards and be able to lock this in so that together we move us towards an electric mobility future. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chris. Questions, comments? Commissioner Sheehan.
Thank you, Chris, and I want to thank you for helping me with the fight against this nonsensical fight against rooftop solar and net metering. And as you know, one of the difficulties I've had with speaking with the Orlando Utilities Commission, which is supposed to be the sustainable one, is they say that the problem with solar generated during the day is that residential rooftop solar people use it more during the night. Your chart here shows basically that commercial energy is the greatest emissions, which would coincide with the greatest usage. So my point is that the residential rooftop solar people are helping the commercial users. And this fallacy somehow that rooftop solar is hurting the grid is, again, nonsense. And I push back on stupid, but I just wanted to point out through this chart that, again, this is another fallacy against renewable energy, that somehow rooftop solar is a problem, because, again, the commercial people who probably can't put solar panels up are still utilizing, and the rooftop solar people are generating during the day when the commercial folks are using. So again, this fallacy that that rooftop solar is hurting the grid is, again, a fallacy. It's nonsense. It's a lie. So I'm going to call that out every chance I get, and every time I see a chart that shows this, I'm going to point it out. That's on rooftop solar. Anyway, I wanted to pivot now to
Thank you, Commissioner.
To electric vehicle. I'm buying a Mini Cooper electric. It gets 110 miles of range. It's one of the lowest range, but I want to show people that it works. So I got, I'm a Mini Cooper driver. I love Mini Coopers,
yes, you do.
But it's got a lower range. So of course I'm interested in, where I can charge within that 110 mile range.
Yes.
And one of the things that I've been actually encouraged by is on the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council now, Metro Plan, they've been talking about putting these in, and making sure these ranges are appropriate, even for a vehicle like mine that gets lower range. So that's amazing and good, but that's the kinds of things that we need to be looking at in terms of, okay, how close are these together so that not everybody's going to have a Tesla that has, a 400-mile range. As some of these other vehicles come out with less range, how do we get to these charging stations, and how do we get more rapid charging stations? And I know Tesla's got one that charges really rapidly, but they tend to be
proprietary.
Proprietary.
Right.
So again, how do we get, and I think some of the other states have said, you can't just put proprietary in. If you're going to put a rapid charge in, it has to be available to everyone.
Correct.
So those are the kinds of things that I'm concerned about now that I'm educating myself.
Yes.
I haven't even gotten my EV yet, but I'm educating myself. Mine's still in England, waiting on a container ship. Her name is Kelly, and she's green. So
that's wonderful.
But again, these are some things that I'm definitely interested in. But something that I'm also finding is that there are great apps now to assist people to find these charging stations.
Correct.
And so, and again, these are all, apps that people can download. So if there's a reluctance to do EV because there's this concern that you're not going to know where the charging stations are, there is a very robust program to get apps out, to get this information out to people. Another point that I wanted to make, and I think you were here at this meeting, I was at the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council, and someone was giving me a hard time about electric vehicles, and they said we need to be using American oil. And we consume oil imports. American oil is exported. And it was really interesting to see that the person that was giving me a hard time was just ranting and ranting, and one of the staff people actually put from the National Oil Energy whatever council and said that what Commissioner Sheen is saying is true, boom, right here. So I think we need to combat misinformation and fallacies with facts. That that we are reliant upon oil imports, and clean energy is something that is good for our for our world, for our city, and all of that. So I love the idea that you're looking at e-bikes for underprivileged residents. Has there ever been any initiative for bulk EV purchases for underprivileged residents? Not in terms of vehicles, not just bicycles, but in terms of cars.
That's a great question, Commissioner. There hasn't been, but it is something that we could certainly look into. We've also started to see the secondary EV market start to really mature. Here, even in Central Florida, there are a number of cases of people who I've been contacted by saying that I was surprised to find a Nissan Leaf for under $12,000 here in a used vehicle lot. It has over 150-mile range, and it gets me around town, and it's a perfect vehicle. So oftentimes, we think that EVs are the more expensive vehicle on the sticker price. There is a lot of forecasting showing that over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, that is going to change, and a new EV is going to be about the same price, if not cheaper, than a regular combustion engine vehicle equivalent. So we are seeing the price points really come down. There is going to be a crossover here in the short term, but I like your idea about a bulk EV purchase program for our low income, and that's something that we'll explore further. A couple of other comments on what you mentioned. Congratulations on your EV coming up. To your point about the Agnostic Charger, the ones that are going in downtown Orlando.
It's called Agnostic?
It is an agnostic
I love that.
charger. So it is able to charge any vehicle, even if it's a Tesla or a non-Tesla. And so we are prioritizing, just so you're aware, these agnostic chargers, because we don't want just to be placing these fast Tesla chargers. I will say that Tesla met with us about a week and a half ago in our permitting and planning department, because they're saying that Orlando is in the top 5 most popular markets for Tesla in America, and that they anticipate a doubling of their chargers over the course of the next 2 years. So they wanted to meet with us to say, we're getting serious here in Orlando's market. We want to work with you to streamline the permit process to help us go quicker so that we can make this transition much faster.
Can you leverage that so that it is an agnostic as opposed to just a Tesla-only charger?
Well, what we are doing is requiring that they also install some of the agnostic chargers next to their fast chargers. These agnostic chargers will probably be level 2 chargers. They're a level 3, kind of a faster charger, but it will be, for each one of these Tesla banks, there will be the capability for any vehicle to be able to charge.
I think we should hold them to level 3. Can you explain what the difference between level 1, level 2, level 3 charging is, Chris?
Yes, so level 1 is like your regular wall outlet. It's 110, 120 volts out of the wall. That will charge your EV about 5 miles for every hour that it's plugged in. Okay, so over the course of a night, it's going to give you about 30 to 40 miles of charge. Which is more than enough for the average driver across the country, right? Average, we're driving 30 miles round trip, 85% of the population. So I had a Chevy Volt, one of those plug-in hybrid vehicles. Not the whole car was electric, but I had about 60 miles electric. And I rarely had to fuel my car unless I was going out of the city, because all of my driving would happen throughout the day. I would come home, I would plug in on the level 1 outlet, trickle charge. By the time I woke up and went to work, I already had my battery back up, right? So keep that in mind, Commissioner. When you own an EV, your behavior completely changes. It's not about driving all the way till you get to E and then go fill up. It's literally always be charging. The rule is ABC, always be charging. So if you're at home, you're charging. If you go to work and you see an empty charger, you should try to charge. And so that way you don't have to worry about the range, even with a 110-mile vehicle. So those are just a couple of thoughts. We are looking to continue to expand the rapid DC fast charging to be agnostic for those chargers. And the one in downtown will have 20 stations that are fast chargers for any vehicle, including Teslas, but also your Mini Cooper.
Okay, so level 1.
Yep, level 1 is out of the wall. Level 2 is like a dryer outlet.
Level 1 is out of the wall with what percentage per hour?
About 5 miles for every hour of charging.
Okay. And level 2?
Level 2 is a 240 volt, which is like your dryer outlet, okay, NEMA 1450 socket. That charges between 30 and 40 miles every hour that it's being charged, okay? And then a level 3 could be hundreds of miles per hour being charged.
Right.
So you're talking about, 20 to 30 minutes of your car, and you're already from 0 back up to 100.
Sorry to ask you questions I already know the answer to, but
That's okay.
I just think it's important information for the public and for everyone to have.
Yeah.
Because while we're talking about these chargers and the difference,
Yes.
I think it's important that people understand why we want level 3s.
Yes.
Because if there's an emergency and people have to get out of town fast,
You got to be able to rapid charge.
Exactly. Okay.
You got it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all I had.
Commissioner Stewart?
Great. Hey, Chris, thank you for everything. I think the biggest challenge we have is consumer education, because what occurs is that everybody gets excited about what they could do, and then they find all the faults of electric vehicle. The fault of going out of town in a hurry, the fault of trying to get gas in a hurry. I mean, those are all things that are really a re-education of our consumer. One of the things that concerns me is where's the car industry going in terms of standardizing and charging and standardizing and battery? Because I think that probably is the one thing that will educate the consumer more than anything else. To have an electric vehicle by Ford or by GM or by somebody else, Tesla has figured it out that we're going to keep ours proprietary and kind of keep ahead of the game. but where does everybody else fall in terms of being kind of standardized?
Good question, Commissioner. They are starting to all standardize around the same type of plug. And there are now 3 types of fast charging plugs. Your Tesla plug, your what they call CCS, and then another one they called CHAdeMO. CHAdeMO is really moving out. It was started by Nissan, and it was really a foreign type of application, and even Nissan is moving towards the standard CCS. And so the American automakers have all come along and said, we're going to unify around this CCS standard. Tesla has even come out with news that they are going to move away from proprietary over the coming years and standardize CCS. It's already standard in Europe. So when you get a Tesla in Europe and you buy one there, it already comes equipped with the CCS charger, and there is no regular Tesla port. So they're moving in this direction. They also see that it's an Achilles heel for the industry. If we're all, different, we're not going to help create the revolution that we're all needing. And so they're starting to come together. I'd say within the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see every EV coming out with the standard application, the standard, port.
I think that's the key as we begin to look forward for users. I mean, I've talked to probably hundreds of people who all say, I don't mind having one electric vehicle, but I'm not going to have more than one because I need a second because I'm going to North Carolina or I need to travel and I don't want to have that hassle. Mm-hmm. And then I've talked to several Tesla guys who are have the fast ones, and I said, how'd you drive down here from Wisconsin? Mm-hmm. Because I just pulled over and got a fast charger and had lunch. I went, man, that's like really cool.
Yeah, I've driven from here to New York and back in an all-electric, and a lot of these chargers are nearby shopping malls. They're nearby, restaurants. A lot, Wawa's is starting to take a big advantage, and they're realizing that they're actually making more money because the more time you're in their store, you're usually spending some money, right? And you got about 30 minutes to charge your car. So they rather have EV drivers show up to Wawa's than gasoline drivers because their margins are better. Quite frankly.
But it's a change of consumer behavior.
It is. Yeah. And to get to that point, Commissioner, we've been working with OUC on a program called Electrified Dealership, where there's a group of authorized dealers, there's about 9 of them now, that are participating in this program. And the program is that if a resident comes out to the dealership, OUC actually provides a $50 Visa gift card just to test ride an electric vehicle. They don't have to buy it, they don't have to lease it, they just have to go out to the dealership and test it out. Because studies show that when you get behind the EV, it's a paradigm shift in your thinking. You now get it immediately. So we want to put butts in seats and have them try it out. The other thing that OUC said is, we heard from the dealerships and they said, it takes about an hour to 2 hours more to sell an electric car than a regular car because of a lot of things you're mentioning, right? We got to educate them about the charger and where things are. Well, time is money. And OUC said, you know what? We'll give the sales rep an incentive of $50 per vehicle that they sell just to encourage them to sell more EVs. And we're starting to see a real ramp up of EV sales here in Orlando as a result. At the end of 2020, December 31st, 2020, we had 6,400 EVs on the road in Orlando. By the end of last year, December 2021, we had 11,000 EVs registered in Orlando. So we had a growth of right around 60% in 1 year as it relates to EV sales. We're now going to see that continue to rise with the rise in gas prices and more awareness around how much it takes, how much cost it is to own these types of vehicles.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Gray and Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chris, very much. A couple of questions on page 13, which is about today's resolution.
Yes.
The 4th of the 6 bullet points is describe the composition of the e-mobility task force.
Yes.
Tell me more about that. Who's on that force? Have we selected that? Maybe I missed it.
Yes, so the e-mobility task force was made up of many of the groups that I had mentioned above, and I'm going to go to this slide here. This is the 18 organizations and government entities that came together to establish this roadmap. This is the makeup of our task force. Now, the working groups that we have are primarily staff within each one of these organizations that are coming together around certain goals that they align with, but this is the composition of the task force that is outlined in the resolution.
Great. And then question, I don't know this, you probably do. Of the percent of EV vehicles we have now, what percent is that here in the U.S.? It's less than 10%.
It is less than 10% of, are you talking about, it's
Just
less than
ownership.
10% for both of them, yeah.
How many Commissioner Sheehan's are there, I guess is my question.
Well, it's growing.
There's only one, excuse me, there's only one. No,
I
but
think
it's
they-
less than 10%, is it not?
Currently it is, yes.
Okay.
Currently it's less than 10%. It's actually less than 5% when you look across the country. But the growth rate is really what we need to be paying attention to, right? We just saw a pretty rapid rise just in this last year, and we're anticipating that because of the war and the rise in fuel, that 2022 is going to be a record year for EV sales as well.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And I guess what I tell myself is clearly this is the path going forward. We all know that. But we still have a long ways to go. I mean, for every study that we show that it's cheaper to have an EV, you can find a couple that say it's not. And you throw in things like tax credits and all sorts of other stuff. There's a lot of variables. We're getting there. You know, one of the other issues I'm reading about a lot is to put in the lithium batteries, which are really the ones that provide the power and the boost. You got a lot of raw materials that we don't have here in the States in great amounts. And so then you start getting into the international politics of how do you get the materials, and that's a whole different story we don't need to get. My only point is, we're going that way. I just caution, at least for me, we got to take baby steps and make sure we don't get too far ahead of ourselves, because look, these car manufacturers aren't building EVs to sit on the lot. They're going to make sure they get them sold, right? And they're going to incent in the private sector as much as we will in the public through pricing and support systems to make sure it works.
Definitely.
They're not building them to not sell them. So anyway, thank you for your work. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner, and I agree 100%. There's a new effort by the Biden administration to also try to ramp up manufacturing and of lithium-ion here. There's also a growing recycling market for lithium-ion batteries, and there's several companies that are now able to capture those batteries from vehicles and get it down to about 90+% of that material being recycled back into the economy. So, you know, there's a growing interest both in that supply, but also what do we do with these vehicles after they hit their useful life? And that battery is still about 80% good in terms of its capacity. How can we recycling, you know, other aspects of that? So they're getting creative at, even Nissan is taking some of their own Nissan Leaf batteries and creating power walls like the Tesla Powerwall. They're taking their vehicle batteries and they're putting them now inside people's garages for backup generation. So you have a clean generator in your in kind of your garage. So innovation is just starting in this field, and we're excited to kind of be one of the cities at the forefront of this transition. We see it as a big job creator as well as we start to move forward.
And Commissioner, to your point, I think we're all speculating as to what the saturation level will be and when it will be, but we know it will be, so we have to be ready to accommodate that, and we're one of the communities encouraging that. And the other area we haven't talked about in this particular thing, though, is autonomous vehicles and how we're going to accommodate those, because today we don't really have any traveling, but say 10 years from now, who knows how many autonomous vehicles we'll have on the road. Commissioner Ortiz.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, if I didn't know you any better, I would say you had some inside information on Russia and Ukraine.
This is a national security strategy, Commissioner Ortiz. We are trying to minimize our consumption of any foreign energy resources.
You had a great foresight about those EV stations. Good timing. Good timing. So my question, I guess this is for you and the mayor in terms of OUC. I don't know if Governor DeSantis signed the net metering law yet.
Not yet.
Has he?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So what's going to be OUC stance on this?
Well, Commissioner, I don't think OUC has a stance just yet in the public. They are currently doing a study of the solar programs, and that's something that Mayor was briefed on late last year to really look at the growth of solar in our community, and to Mayor's point, how do we maintain a robust solar marketplace, whatever we end up doing, whether it's with net metering or other types of rebates and incentives. So at this point in time, OUC has not indicated any changes to their rates as it relates to net metering, to our knowledge.
And the bill does
Go ahead.
The bill does not relate to municipal utilities, so.
I understand it, but that's why I'm asking what's going to be
Yes.
OUC stance on that, because I know that it doesn't relate to the municipal utilities.
That's correct,
Having
that
said that, there's a direct impact in terms of this kind of vehicles, because a lot of people are going to, or they want to have solar panels in order to recharge those batteries, to recharge the vehicles. And so,
That's a very good point.
okay,
In fact,
yeah.
in OUC's EIRP, the big integrated resources plan they did last year, right, where they were looking out to 2050 and saying, how do we hit net zero? What are we going to do? In the load forecast that they identified, the growth of solar is almost identical to the growth of electric vehicles, which is quite interesting, right? EVs add more load to the grid, meaning selling more power, and solar is seen, especially rooftop solar, is seen as a load reducer for them. So it's almost offset, and I pointed that out when we were looking at the trajectory, because I said, it's almost matched. Is that the case? And they said, yeah, pretty much. It's, for the growth of rooftop solar, it's almost being offset by that growth of EVs. So, and of course, those customer profiles seem to, be also very similar. Those that like rooftop solar tend to want to move towards the EVs. So you're almost offsetting yourself in terms of the loss or the potential cost impact. But regardless, OUC is still, really looking at what that may look like for our market, and hopefully we'll have some news here soon.
We may be offsetting ourselves, but we're really helping the environment, which is the main thing. Thank you for this presentation. You're always on top of, of all these issues, and we really appreciate it, because that makes us, in the Central Florida region, being the number one when it comes to conservation. Can I have a copy of this where we can post it? Because I think the community needs to know about this.
By all means, yes,
Thank
sir.
you, boss. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Great job.
Commissioner.
Commissioner Burns?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Chris, great work. Just one question around the equitable and affordable access. I know you mentioned about some potential support to nonprofits, but what do you see as strategies for the residents? More particularly, what do you see as the city's role and responsibility in ensuring that access?
Well, we've taken a first step, thanks to you all's leadership, in trying to expand the charging infrastructure. That's usually the conversation, right? The chicken or the egg scenario. And we made sure that we were equitable in the distribution of those to land them even in parts of our city that may not have any adoption of electric vehicles. But we know that it's the barrier of entry for residents to consider whether or not they want to get into an EV, is having that reliable charging. So I think from our perspective, helping to develop that robust charging infrastructure in partnership with OUC is really important. Step two, I talked about this piloting of an e-bike initiative, and I think that there are other types of electric mobility that may be better suited and even more requested by our low income residents, that as an example, they may be able to get to an e-bike that also connects to the limo and to any of the public transit buses, and allows them to have a little bit more of a better experience getting to and from work or wherever they need to go. And in addition to that, I think overall we're trying to explore how essentially we might emulate some other cities in creating these car share type programs. LA, Indianapolis, Minnesota have all created car share initiatives in partnership with their transit agencies that are subsidized for certain household levels of income. And so we're trying to kind of take an ecosystem approach to how we support our low income in getting into EVs, because we know, and the studies show, that it is the more cost-effective vehicle to own and operate once you're in it. Right? The question becomes, how do we get it down so the price point to get into them are more affordable?
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Sheehan?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. And I would like to just, not to crosstalk, but Commissioner Ortiz's concern, while the net metering bill does not apply to OUC, they've been doing some very misleading push polls. I actually got it as a solar customer, and that's what kind of pushed me to get kind of upset, because I actually asked for the transcript, because I'm like, am I really hearing what I'm hearing from OUC? And they were saying that rooftop solar customers pass costs along to other customers, which is not true. They also, and when I confronted on them, they say, well, we're not as bad as some of the other power companies. And I'm like, and they say, well, you wealthy solar owners are impacting the poor. And I'm like, what? So there's a lot of fallacies being told during these push polls, and I actually got a copy of the push poll.
And I know what a push-pull is. I've been in politics long enough, and it was basically misinformation about solar energy, and I was very upset about it. I talked to OUC about it, and they just continue to mansplain me and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. And I know one thing. I invested $22,000 in solar energy because I believe in helping the environment. And they don't want to compensate me fairly for the amount of power that I generate. And that's not right, and that's not fair. And this net metering bill is just basically robbing the people who want to do the right thing for the environment. So, if they're not as bad as the other power companies, well, you know, why don't you lead instead of following bad legislation? So that's my concern, is that OUC will now try to adopt it now they've seen the other power companies do it. So there's this fallacy that that we are rich people impacting the poor. I actually at one of the summits that we had for the police department, there were many of the residents from Paramore who actually had invested in solar that were very concerned about this. So this fallacy that we're all rich people and that we're hurting the poor is nonsense. I'm a civil servant, been there my whole life. This was a tremendous investment for me. And now to say, you know, I could have gone out and bought it. There's a lot I could have done with $22,000. So I just think it's really unfair what's being said, and I'm going to continue to speak out against it. Yes, it impacts me directly, but it also impacts all of the people that we have encouraged to participate in the solar program through the city of Orlando. And it's also going to impact our own investments in solar energy. If we put rooftop solar on our facilities, are then we not going to be able to see that? We installed that at taxpayer expense. Are we not going to be able to pass that savings on to our own, you know, users and our own community centers? So again, you can go ahead and say mansplaining and saying, "That's a hysterical woman." I'm tired of being called that. That's usually what you call smart people who don't agree with you. You know, I'm going to keep standing up against this because it's nonsense and it's not fair. And I don't mind leading. I've never minded leading. You know, I'll continue to do that. But this is, again, there's all of these things that are supposed to keep us supposed to keep us out of being progressive and doing clean energy and doing things that make sense for the environment. And I'm going to continue to fight against it and stand up against it. But I want to thank you, Chris, because you've had to listen to me scream and holler and rail against this nonsense and back me up, and I appreciate that. But, you know, again, we need to, if we want to truly be a progressive leading city on clean energy, we can't let people take our eye off the prize, tell us a bunch of nonsense and lie to us about clean energy. We have got to call it out and continue to be the leaders. And I appreciate you for that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your advocacy, Commissioner. And I'll tell you, we still are leading the pack here. And both myself and Mayor Dyer are both very passionate about this topic. And we're going to do our best to maintain a robust marketplace here for clean energy. We know it's the fastest growing job creator in Florida. We know it's a big economic development driver. And of course, it's one of the best ways that we can address the climate crisis. So thank you for that. And we'll continue to fight the good fight.
Okay, Chris, thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor.
Keep up. Good work. And as to the public workshop, we'll bring that to a close and stand adjourned.